Okay, so I have hopefully a little bit more fun video today, and it's thinking about some potential plot holes in Star Wars. You may have heard of this before. I hadn't heard of it before I thought of it, but it's not one of the more commonly pointed out ones. Um, I'll start off by saying I know that the way that the engines in Star Wars work do not require keys for, turning the ignition or anything like that, but it would make sense that if there was some kind of object, something similar to a key, just in terms of security for starting and taking a vehicle, or a speeder, usually a spaceship in Star Wars, because there's often cases where it seems like in Star Wars they'll just kind of jump into a ship, just grab it and go, and this causes a few plot holes that you would think in an advanced society with all that other technology and all the other things they do for security, you could at least get some kind of key. So just to start with one example that I thought of, so I'll just go through a couple here, and obviously spoilers if you haven't already seen the Star Wars movies, but we'll just mostly be focusing on just a few examples from the kind of original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. But we have in Return of the Jedi, when the rebels are preparing to kind of take over the shield generator base on the moon of Endor, the way that they kind of begin that, or one of the parts of that, is one of the Ewoks climbs onto one of the stormtroopers' speeders and starts it, zips off, distracting the remaining stormtroopers, which allows the rebels to kind of get the jump on the base. So here, you would think maybe, why does the stormtrooper not just have a key in his pocket? Now, if they had these basic security measures, right, this would probably prevent this speeder from being stolen right away. Even if we think that, okay, maybe it's more like some of the cars now where you have a key, but you don't actually have to put it in the ignition, but you still have to have it with you in order for the engine to start. Something like that seems like it would make a lot of sense. And so, yeah, maybe you could say like the stormtrooper was still standing close enough to the speeder that that type of key would still activate. Okay. So that's one example that could cause some problems. Because obviously their stealth takeover of the base, even though it's not completely a stealth takeover as it turns out, but that the thought that they did it stealthily is important for the plot. So then let's think about another kind of big example from episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The main one to start off with is Anakin going into space in the Naboo starfighter, right? So this is toward the end when, Qui-Gon famously says, "Stay in the cockpit," and Anakin proceeds to go into the space battle, but stays in the cockpit, technicalities and whatnot. But the fact that he was able to start the spaceship in the first place, wouldn't have happened if he required a key. Now, again, you could say maybe that one of the pilots who was supposed to be in that ship had the key on him, this kind of remote activation key, the proximity key, and that would at least allow him to start the spaceship, but that still wouldn't allow him to get very far. And then if we're thinking about in the next movie, Attack of the Clones, we have the scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan are chasing down the bounty hunter Sam Wessel, and this kind of, when she gets killed by Jango Fett, that kind of leaves the dart that starts the whole journey from, Obi-Wan tracking down Jango Fett, which leads to eventually the start of the Clone War, right? So it's a pretty big, important part there, but Anakin picks up Obi-Wan as they're chasing after Sam, and he just grabs kind of like a random speeder. He even says, Obi-Wan's like, "What took you so long?" And of course he says, well, I, had to pick out a speeder that I liked, implying that he just kind of jumped in to one once he found one that he liked and just kind of took off. Again, this wouldn't really work if you had to have a key. So that's just kind of a few thoughts here. And again, a pretty big development within the whole plot. Now, I will say, in most of these cases, most of these characters just jumping into vehicles would probably be able to hotwire the vehicle as well, or do the equivalent of that. So Anakin, for example, would definitely be able to do that. So, you know, maybe it would only take him a few more seconds or something. Could be relevant to the plot sometimes, sometimes not. But still, it feels like, given all the other technology and security protocols and things in Star Wars, why can ships just kind of be randomly walked into and you just take off? At least for speeders especially. This also brings up a problem if, for example, you have those proximity keys, and oftentimes in Star Wars there'll be chases and things like that where someone's getting knocked off a speeder and someone else is climbing onto the speeder. But if you just had the person who's supposed to be driving the speeder have that kind of key on their person, then they get knocked off the speeder stops running, and that would, you know, prevent a lot of escapes. So yeah, so tell me what you think about this kind of idea. Is this really a plot hole? I think it is. You know, I mean, obviously not within the way it's construed, but you really think they ought to do something about that, and that it would have occurred to somebody somewhere in Star Wars that, like, hey, maybe I don't want people to just be able to jump on my speeder and take off. So yeah, so I think that kind of summarizes what I was thinking there. You can now try to notice this whenever you're watching any Star Wars. I'm sure there's way more examples. Again, I just picked a few just from the main movies, but I'm pretty sure this comes up a lot in things like various of the TV shows and things like that. So yeah, so watch for that as you go. Maybe comment below if you find other instances of this. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video and gave you something to think about while watching Star Wars, or not. But yeah, see y'all.